Hello, gardeners, and welcome to the first show of 2021. We've made it through the new year, and now we have the beginning of another great gardening year, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to today and the next week, and looking forward to the time we're going to spend answering your questions and just talking a lot about good gardening information. I want to go ahead and highlight a comment that I think is awesome. I have to scroll back up to see if I can find it, from Mage Grey Wolf this morning. And I think this is a great way to start the day because I'm always talking about trying new things, experimenting, testing. And I think this is just so fantastic on so many levels. If you notice that something is happening or not happening in your garden and you try something new, that's a great way to become a better gardener. And so thank you for sharing this because this is one of those things. Yes, if you've got some plants that don't do well in cold weather, you can try things like putting warm water on them and see if that makes a difference. So thank you for sharing that. You're testing the whole idea of cold sensitive plants and warm water. I think that's a great way to start the new year, and I'll be talking more about that through the rest of today because I think as we begin our new year and look to what our seasons will bring, a lot of that is trying new stuff, experimenting, doing things that we hadn't thought about before. And you may discover a new way of doing things in your garden that really make it easier and more enjoyable. So I really like starting the show with that because I think it's a great idea. PD was asking a question about a compost pile. And I want to thank Trudy's Fun because you were spot on with all your answers. And so the question is about adding scraps to the compost pile. So PD has continued to add scraps for 4 months to the compost pile. I do this. Many of us do this, especially in the winter. But the question is, to use the compost in the spring, should they stop doing it? And yes, as Trudy's Fun pointed out, at some point you do need to stop adding new material to your compost pile. If you haven't seen it yet, I suggest you look up my video on compost because I talk a lot more about the different types of bacteria. And that's really how compost is primarily made. You should have some fungal aspects in it, but it's the bacteria that breaks it down. And there are different types of bacteria. So if you keep adding material to your compost pile, it will stay relatively cool because those types of bacteria will be decomposing all the material. Once you stop adding the organic matter to your compost pile, well then as it's decomposed, the heat will start to rise. And when the pile starts getting pretty warm, then the thermophilic bacteria jump into play. And those are the ones that really hasten the decomposition of the material in your compost pile. So if you want quick compost, and by quick I mean 1 to 3 months for it to finish, you really need to get those thermophilic bacteria involved. And that only happens when the temperature rises. And the temperature will only rise when you stop adding material to the pile. So stop adding the material, keep it moist, turn it, because as that bacteria starts to grow and just take over, it's going to require a lot of oxygen. So you really need to turn your pile to introduce oxygen on a regular basis, at least a couple times a week, maybe even every day if you've got a really big pile and they're really active. And then, as was discussed, go ahead and cover it with a tarp to help hold that heat in and also hold the moisture in. So good question, PD. Trudy's Fun, thanks for all of that. And it goes to show, Trudy's Fun's from Australia. Even in Australia, we're doing the same things as in the US. Compost is compost. The bacteria process is exactly the same. And it really doesn't matter where you are. We all can learn from the same basic ways that we're doing compost. So I thought that was a great way to begin seeing that interchange that you all have. So there you have it. And Trudy's Fun saying, been making so much compost lately. That's good for you. Heidi's asking, would warm water cause shock, just like cold water on a plant? Yes, that's possible. And so I'm not sure if this is part of the experiment, but I would add warm water to the soil, not to the plant. Just like I don't recommend spraying cold water on plants during the summer growing season, I wouldn't recommend pouring warm water on the plants during the cool seasons. But adding it to the soil should improve the situation a little bit. And it's not so much that the plant is going to improve because of the warm water. I think it's more that the soil will react better because of the warm water. And again, it gets back to the concept that bacteria will grow better in warmer conditions. And so by warming up the soil, you're improving the bacterial and the fungal activity within the soil. And I think that will benefit the plant more than just the fact that there's warm water involved. So there's a lot more to it, which is why it's a great idea to experiment and see if you can notice any of those results. Okay, let's see. PD, you are welcome. Go ahead and stop adding to the pile. I'm in the process of planning, and I've already started writing an outline for a video I'll be doing in a few months called lazy composting, because I'm a lazy composter. I just keep adding and keep adding and keep adding until the volume of the pile is big enough that it can really start cooking. And that process may take as much as a year. So I tend to be a lazy composter where I do keep adding and adding and adding, but up to a point, you do have to then decide to stop adding the material so that it will break down more completely. Lauren saying, Happy New Year from Nashua, New Hampshire. Well, Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year, everybody. Hope it was a happy and safe and healthy New Year's to everybody. Claudia says, good morning from California. Good to see you. Lena's saying good morning. It's always nice to see everybody checking in. Denise from Wisconsin. Nice to see all the new channel members as well as you're signing in. And Lilac, I hope I pronounced that close, from Israel. That's awesome. Good to see you as well. It's morning for us. I'm guessing it's probably evening for you. So awesome to have you here. That's spectacular. Anetan, finally caught alive. Love your vids. Can't wait to start back gardening this year. Thank you for that super chat. Nice way to start today. I'm glad you are also here live. I'm glad all of you are live. I'm glad I'm here live. You know, this is one of those things, and I say it every week just because it really is special. But I do so look forward to this time, and I start thinking about what I'm going to present days ahead of time. And so for me, it really is a build-up because I know what I want to say. I look forward to all of your questions, and then it finally comes and we can sit here and share all of our information. So it's spectacular. Okay, let's see what we have. Some good information from Jay and Heidi and Lauraful already this morning. And so those of you that are new to the chat or even new to the replay, you'll see that there's some very knowledgeable gardeners that are part of the community. And even if I can't get to your question and answer it, there's a lot of gardeners on this channel that are here to help you out. And Lauraful and Heidi and Jay are some that I like to point out. And I'll also point out Trudy's Fun, because Trudy's Fun has been active in recent weeks as well, and also always has good information. So you don't always have to rely on me. You can lean on some of these other gardeners for some good information as well. And again, that's just spectacular. Gladys, good to see you. Thank you for that super sticker. And Gladys, thank you for signing up for the channel membership. You were one of the very first. So I appreciate you, Gladys. You're a special part of this community. Thanks so much. Nicholas is asking a question. Gardener Scott, as my property is currently under a blanket of snow, should I cover my compost area with a tarp during this time? Yes and no. It depends. If your pile is already frozen because of the snow and because of the cold weather, covering it with a tarp will essentially hold that cold in. And so for the most part, I leave my pile uncovered in the winter. It will go through freeze and thaw cycles, but there still will be some bacterial action until the pile is really frozen. But by covering it after it's gotten cold, it's really not doing much for the pile. Unless you have a really large amount of snow and you're trying to hold that melting snow on your compost pile, then it might work. I would suggest instead wait until the pile starts to thaw out a little bit. Then you can cover it with a tarp to help hold in some of the heat that's being generated by the bacteria. If you already have a hot pile and it's already generating the heat, then yes, covering it with a tarp can help keep it from cooling down because of the snow and because of the cool weather. So it really comes down to where your pile is right now as far as the heat within it to decide whether a tarp would benefit or not. Lena's saying, Gardner Scott, for our Zone 5, do you think it's an okay time to start winter planting for cool weather spring crops now? And so as far as winter planting, I would say winter sowing. A lot of it depends on how soon your spring is going to come, when your last frost will arrive. Now's a good time to start putting some seeds out for sowing some of those seeds. So when the soil warms up and the weather warms up, they'll be already in the soil ready to sprout. It might be a little early for winter planting. I don't have any plants right now that in my Zone 5 would be ready to go in the ground. The ground's just too cold and too frozen. And you really don't want to be working in frozen ground or even really cold ground. You can really mess up the soil structure by trying to dig in it and break it apart when it's frozen. Instead, let it thaw out. So if you're talking seeds, sure, by all means, sow some of those seeds as part of winter sowing, but I would wait till the soil is workable before I put any plants in it. Tristan Gonzalez, welcome to Garden Collaboration. Thanks for signing up for that. That's awesome. I appreciate that, Tristan. Okay, let's see what else we have showing up here. Strong Style Organics. Perlite is for drainage and aeration. Vermiculite helps distribute moisture and add some aeration. For a base, go with perlite or pumice stone for aeration. Oh, good information. I have a real quick video about perlite and vermiculite, and that's exactly what I say in that video. So thanks for throwing that information out there. I actually use both perlite and vermiculite, depending on the potting mix I'm making. I make my own potting mix. And you're exactly right. I'll use the vermiculite when I want the mix to hold a little bit more moisture, and I'll use perlite when I want it to drain better. But both of them will improve the draining of the soil mix that you're using. So start thinking about that as something new to try. If you are starting to grow more plants from seed, learning how to make your own mix and finding a mix that you like is one of those things that will take you to the next level of gardening. And I've been making my own potting soil and seed starter mix for years and years. And there's a difference. Seed starter mixes don't need to have any nutrients in them at all. The seed carries all the nutrients that the seedling needs to grow. Whereas a potting mix should have some nutrients in it. And I use worm castings and or compost to provide those nutrients. I'll have more videos on that. I already have some videos that discuss that, but this is an area where you can really learn about seeds and seedlings and what you can do when you start taking on that new subject of growing seedlings and making your own mixes, which I think is great. So PD is saying to Trudy's Fun and me, I have the same question that Trudy's Fun just asked regarding past video on potting mix seed starters. I snagged a great price for vermiculite. And so the video talks more about it, but the basic concept is create a mix for the plants that you're growing. And most seedlings will do well in a basic mix of just peat moss and perlite. And that's all I use for my seed starter mix is peat moss and perlite. You could use cocoa coir if you're on the other side of the planet where the coir is cheaper and more available than the peat like it is in the US. But it's just a basic mix just to allow the seedlings to begin growing. It needs to be loose so that the roots start developing. And then when the plant gets big enough, you transplant, you'll upplant into a bigger pot or a bigger tray where the roots can develop and they'll need the nutrition. And that's the point where the soil needs to have something else, like the worm castings or the compost. And then you can grow it in that new medium until it's ready to plant outside, or do another upplanting. If you've seen my how to plant tomatoes video, I'll typically transplant 3 times for my tomatoes, just to really try to encourage as much root growth as I can. So just want to throw that out there. There's a lot more to it. I'm not fried. Welcome to Garden Support. Good to have you part of the community. Thanks for signing up for that. That's awesome. Hawkeye, Texas 549. Regarding seed planting mix, have you heard of folks hydrating the mix using boiling water to help kill fungus gnats and their eggs? Yes, I have heard of that. And by all means, consider doing that. Most of the mixes that you'll buy should already be sterilized. And I've heard too many stories from too many people that say they never had fungus gnats until they bought a bag of potting soil. And so, yes, you can pour boiling water in that mix, and it, in most cases, will kill the fungus gnats or the developing eggs. You might not kill everything, though, but it is worth a try. I haven't had that big a problem with it. That's not a step I take, and I'm usually, because I'm making my own mix, I'm using my own peat, my own vermiculite, my own perlite, and I typically, instead of like buying a bag and using boiling water, I store all of my materials outside in my shed where it gets very hot. And for 2 reasons. It's warm enough that if the eggs are going to grow, if they're going to hatch, then the gnats will emerge, and then they'll die because it's a dry mix out in my shed. Or it's cold enough that it'll kill it in the wintertime. And then I take all my materials, mix them together, and then bring them inside to use. And so, same basic idea. I am taking action to try to kill any of those pests that might be in my potting mix. And you can do the same thing. And I have mixes of potting soil in my shed as well, where it is regularly freezing out there. And so by the time I use them in the garden or in my grow room, I have very few problems with fungus gnats and other insects like that. But yes, taking precautions can help. Jennifer Segrist, welcome to Garden Collaboration as well. Thank you. It's nice to see people joining in. And I'll talk a little bit about the community and the membership here a little bit later, but it's nice to see so many of you active today. Vanessa Kennedy's asking, Gardener Scott, will boiling water kill anything beneficial? Yes, it could kill some of the bacteria. But now, again, most of the mixes that are sold by the big companies have been sterilized in one way or another. Some of them will irradiate them. Some of them will also use that warm or cold storage. And there will be bacteria in those mixes. So if you pour boiling water on it, you can be killing some of the bacteria that might be in that mix that you've bought. And that is, I haven't really seen any research on that, but I do also have that suspicion, which is a reason why I don't use boiling water. Instead, I just use the cold and heat of my shed for my ingredients. But yes, I've had that concern, but I don't necessarily have proof that boiling water will kill that bacteria. It's just a suspicion, which is one reason why I don't do it. So Vishal is asking about succulent fertilizer. I don't grow a lot of succulents, and the succulents that I do grow really don't need fertilizers. So if any of you have any ideas on succulent fertilizers, and go ahead and throw them out there if you would. 6732 Louise, Gardener Scott, as my garden is new to me, I've got a soil test kit for minerals, pH, etc. Should I do it now and prep for spring sowing, planting, or wait till spring? I would say do it as soon as you can, but again, it depends on whether your soil is frozen or not. You should wait until your soil has thawed out to take the soil samples. So if you're in one of the higher zones where your soil can be worked, because you should get down to at least 6 inches depth to really take some good samples. You don't want a surface sample. So if you can work your soil easily down to 6 inches to take the soil samples to then get your test, I would say, sure, go ahead and do it. And that way you can get an early start, figure out what deficiencies your soil might have, and then be ready for whatever corrective action to take. But if your soil is still cold and frozen like mine, then I would wait until it thaws out. But as long as you do it before you start planting, so you still have time to add any of those deficient nutrients, it'll be fine. And a month, 2 months, 3 months ahead of time is often all you need. Frank is asking, thinking about Zinnias and Cosmos this year. Good choice. Is it better to plant the seeds out or start them indoors and transplant out? Better is a relative term, Frank. And I visited Frank's garden a little over a month ago now, and Frank is expanding the space, doing a lot of wonderful things, and zinnias and all the other flowers I'm sure you're considering are good choices. Here's what I did last year. I grew all of those same flowers and more from seed. And it was very easy to then go out and transplant them. And I had great success with my petunias. I probably had more petunias that I'd sprouted from seed than any other plant. But for me, it included coneflowers, the echinacea, it included the zinnias, it included the petunias, I had gaillardia, I had agastache, I had a lot of plants that I started from seed. And because I had a bare space with an idea of how I wanted the structure to develop as far as low flowers and high flowers and colors, I could then take all of those plants and put them exactly where I wanted them to be because I'm still building my landscape. If you have more of an open space where, let's say you have an area that's 4 feet by 4 feet square and you just want some zinnias growing in that space, then just sowing some seeds is fine. And you'll have mixed germination. Some will pop up here and some will pop up there. But if you just want to fill a space with flowers, then open sowing can be quite effective. It will take more seed. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to bring up today when talking about seeds, is if you have a lot of seeds and you have an open space, then feel free to sow. I've noticed in my landscape, the birds are pretty active. Now, I just hung up a big seed ring that I got for Christmas, and the birds are chowing down on that seed ring, but they're also all over the ground eating seeds, which is okay, because for me, most of those seeds are weed seeds. But if you openly sow some of the flowers that you want to grow, you do run the risk that the birds will come in and eat those seeds before they germinate. You also run the risk of other animals and weather and just poor germination. So open sowing an area really has mixed results as far as what plants will sprout and where. And that's why I prefer to do it indoors. I'm not using as many seeds because instead of sowing 100 Cosmos seeds and maybe 2 or 3 of them will get through all of those obstacles to germinate, instead I can sow 10 Cosmos seeds, which I should expect at least 8 or 9 plants to develop. And now I can put those plants exactly where I want them to be. So I suggest doing different methods just to see what you prefer and to learn from the process. I like the process of growing indoors, and that way it allows me to know exactly what I'm planting. That's what it comes down to. Greg Hill is saying, Gardener Scott, I want to try and grow mustard to let it seed and make my own fermented mustard. Will any mustard variety work, or are there specific mustard varieties for this? There are specific mustard varieties. I don't know any off the top of my head, but depending on the type of mustard you want, you can buy all kinds of different varieties. There are milder varieties, there are more pungent varieties, but yes, there are definitely different types. I did try that this year. I did grow some mustard. I'm sorry, I don't remember the variety off the top of my head. And it gets back to the birds. I was growing a bunch of mustard plants in my vertical growing system, the green stock system that you might have seen in the video. And they were doing great. The mustard did great. They flowered. It was wonderful. They seeded. I was going to go out and harvest the seed, and I went out and there were no more seeds left. And the birds had discovered the mustard seeds right before I was going to harvest them. So when you grow a plant for seed like that, like mustard, you might want to consider the birds, and you might want to also plan for some bird netting or something over it. That's what I'll do this year. I want to grow mustard again this year, and I haven't ordered the seeds yet, so now I get an opportunity to try to find the good varieties as well. But I'll definitely cover my mustard seeds with bird netting this year, because I learned the hard way that birds like that. I don't know what it is. I had a whole bunch of other plants in my garden that were seeding at the same time that the birds left alone, like the turnips. Some of the birds ate some of the turnip seeds, but I had a ton of turnip seeds. The mustard seeds were gone in a single day. So there must be something about the mustard seeds that the birds like. Go figure. Hey, Laura Fry, thank you for that super chat, asking, can you talk about green sand, azomite, and kelp, please? Thank you. And I'm so happy to support your channel with my membership. I'm happy for that as well. And Greg Daner, thank you to the Garden Support membership. That's awesome. Okay, so green sand is a way for you to improve your soil by adding potassium to it. Green sand is a mineral that is mined and offers potassium. That's how it's sold. The problem is that it's very slow to release that mineral. And so if you're looking to improve your soil, and I did this, in fact, in my video, it's a few years old now. I think it might even be about 2.5 years old, where I was making my own seed starter mix at the school. I talked about using the blood meal for the nitrogen, the bone meal for the phosphorus, and the green sand for the potassium when you make your own potting soil. What I've learned since then is that the green sand just doesn't give the plants the infusion of the potassium that they'll need in that growing season. Over time, it might help. But I've gotten away from using green sand because this is where soil tests come in. Most of our soils do have an adequate amount of potassium. And so though my soil is deficient in nitrogen, it has an adequate amount of potassium. So I don't really need to add green sand in my particular garden setting. If you have a potassium deficiency, you can add it. As far as adding it to a potting mix, it really doesn't do much good because it's not an organic material that's being decomposed by the bacteria and then taken up by the plant. It's a mineral that takes a long time. And the azomite is very similar. Same concept. Lots of different minerals involved, but it's a very, you can think of it as a very slow release fertilizer. And it's only necessary if your soil is deficient in those particular nutrients. Well, a soil test will help you determine that. I know there's a lot of gardeners that are using a lot of these inorganic materials like rock dust, and in most cases, it's not necessary. In fact, most of our regions, most of our cities, even with master gardener centers, you do have to pay for a soil test, but the cost of the soil test can save you the expense of buying a lot of those inorganic amendments that might not be necessary. And as for kelp, kelp is awesome. Kelp is loaded with nutrients. And because it's organic, it will decompose and it will give all of those benefits, all of those nutrients to the soil once it starts breaking down. And so I know some of you actually have access to the seaside and you can harvest your own kelp. Throw it in your compost pile. It's a great way to use it. You can buy kelp extracts and kelp fertilizers And except for the fact that they've been processed, it can also add a lot to your garden. So I have used kelp as a fertilizer in the past because it's organic and it does add the ingredients as soon as it gets into the soil and all the bacteria start acting on it. But as far as the inorganic stuff, I'm not as big a fan of those. Jay Wells, thank you for that super chat. That's awesome. Proud to be a new Gardener Scott member. What are we to be called? Scotsmen and Scotswomen, Scotty dogs. Congrats on your continued success. That's awesome. Your channel's a treasure. Thank you. I think all of you are a treasure. I'm not going to create a name for all of you. Having been in the military, having been a pilot, it's one of those things that you have a call sign that is often one that is associated with you through your career. And the call sign is given to you. You don't really necessarily get to choose your own call sign. And so often you are given a call sign that may or may not match with what you prefer. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give you a name that you might not appreciate. I'll let you decide for yourself what you want to call yourself. But Scotsmen and Scotswomen has a nice ring to it. I appreciate that. But thank you so much. John Ann, thank you. Another new member, upgraded the membership to garden training. That's awesome. I appreciate that. And I'll go ahead and talk about it now. I talked briefly last week about it. There's a new membership option here on the Gardener Scott channel. It helps support the channel. And I am looking forward to using the opportunity for this new growth, this new membership to really benefit you and a lot of other gardens in my area that might need some extra support. The YouTube or the Facebook group has already just been fantastic in the last couple of days because you can upload pictures. And this is really fantastic. So many of you are uploading pictures to the Facebook group, and then others get involved and you share your ideas. And I think that's just fantastic. And there's other benefits as well. So if you're watching this on a PC, you can click below where you see the blue and white join button. You don't have to join. And by clicking the join button, it doesn't mean you will automatically join. It just tells you more about what the membership program is. If you're on a phone or some other mobile device, you probably won't see the button. You'll have to use your browser to go to YouTube and go to the Gardener Scott homepage, and then you'll see the option. But it's so nice to see. And it's little things. You might see the little yellow flower and the green names. You'll get badges and you'll get some emojis that I custom made and just some little perks like that. But for the most part, nothing else is changing. I mean, I'm still doing the Monday live streams. I'll still be doing videos. I've got a video coming out on Thursday. I've got a video coming out on Saturday. Starting the beginning of February, I'm planning to have 3 videos a week in addition to the live stream. And all of that is still free. You don't have to pay for any of that. This is just one of those extra things if you want to support the channel and have a few extra little perks that might interest you or not. But for now, let's just move forward, enjoy the community, enjoy the Monday live stream, get some more questions answered. Let's talk some more about some seed starting, since that is on my list of what I want to talk about. And I kind of touched on it when we were talking about the potting soil and how I will transplant my tomatoes. And if you start in a seed starter mix, you will need to go up to a potting mix. Now, you can start seeds directly into a potting mix, but in my experience, especially if you're buying a potting mix and then starting seeds in it, most commercial potting mixes are really pretty dense. There's little bark chunks in it. It's not a fine, loose material. And that's the key difference. A soil starter mix, again, is like peat moss and perlite. Light, fluffy, well-draining. It gives the seed a chance to establish some roots and grow. But if you start in a potting mix, well, that may be too dense. The seed might not have enough energy to really generate the roots it needs to get to get that seedling off to a good start. And that's the key difference between the two. But you can, if you make your own potting mix light and fluffy, sow directly in it. One of the reasons I do the two is because of space. And this is what I want to highlight right now. You do need to anticipate how much space your seedlings are going to take, especially if this is the first time you've done it or if you don't have a lot of experience yet. It's really easy and fun to take a single tray of 72 cells and sow 72 seeds. It really is really cool when you see 72 plants sprout underneath your lights. If you have like a table and that's your grow operation for the year, it's really awesome. But you have to think about the future, because those 72 seedlings are not going to be able to stay in that little cell for the entire life. At some point, they're going to be moved into a larger environment. Now, if you're starting seeds with the intent to transplant them out soon after sowing, sure, you can bypass the step of moving into a bigger pot. But this is more for the tomatoes and the peppers and the perennial flowers, the ones that you'll start in a small cell and then you'll transplant to a bigger pot before putting outside. Well, do think about that, because if you've got a really small setup with just a single light and a single table, what are you going to do when you have 72 pots? That's one of those things that I've made the mistake, I know others have made the mistake as well, is you don't think about that interim period of how the plants are going to grow before they go outside. So you might want to consider maybe growing half of what you had planned, unless you buy more lights. If you just want to keep what you have right now, look at it. How many yogurt cups can you put underneath your lamp? How many solo cups will be underneath that shop light? And that should really be the limit that you target, because all of those plants are going to need good direct light during the growing process. And so look at your grow operation from that perspective. How many plants will it sustain right before you transplant outside? And then back that off to then determine how many seeds you're going to start. And this is one of those little things I think a lot of gardeners don't think through enough, because it's so painful when you have so many plants that are going so well and you just run out of space and you don't have the lights, and then you have to start pulling some of those plants out, deciding which ones live and die. That's not a happy place to be. So plan ahead, have enough lights for the plants that you're going to grow, and you'll be doing great. Okay, Greg is saying, what about using both seed starting mix and potting mix? Say top couple inches of starter mix and then potting underneath. Yeah, and that's actually a good suggestion. I had someone commented on that yesterday, and we had a little discussion online through one of my videos. Yes, you can do that. Let's say you have a 4-inch pot. Yes, you could easily put the bottom 3/4 of potting soil, potting mix, and the top quarter with a seed starter mix. Absolutely. And then once the roots start growing, they'll grow into that potting mix, and that potting mix will have that extra nutrition. That's definitely a way that you could do it. But the concept is still there. You want to start it in a nice loose medium and then offer the nutrients later on. So I like to go ahead and start in the smaller cells, because you might not always get 100% germination. And that's one reason why I don't do it in pots with a stratified mix like that, because the seeds aren't always going to germinate. And now I won't say wasted, but I've used a pot that could have been used for another plant that needed transplanting. But if you know that you have a finite number of plants that you're growing and you've got that space underneath the lights, sure, go ahead and do that. Go ahead and have the potting soil and the seed starter mix in the same pot, and it should work fine. So thanks for asking that. That's definitely one of those things that definitely works. Tammy's asking, does anyone know if you can grow a plant in a clear container will the light hurt the roots? Yes, you can grow in a clear container, and it's possible that the light could hurt the roots. But it's kind of what we talked about, I think, last week with air pruning. Some of the roots, when they're exposed to light, it can damage the root. That just means that the light or the roots that are on the outside of that little container aren't going to grow, which could be a good thing. You're not going to have the ringing of the roots. There are some roots that will grow in light and it won't damage it at all. grow in the container you have. If you see that it is a problem, that you're not getting good root development, well, then maybe you can put that cup inside another cup and help block some of that light. But you can definitely grow in clear containers. Gardeners do it all the time. Okay. You guys are just so awesome. John Ann, thank you for being active today, helping with information back and forth. That's incredible. Katie Ann at Ozark Hollow Homestead, you as well. Thanks for helping out Tammy. That's incredible. And you say, yes, I've grown starts in clear cups, and they've done just as well as ones in solid color cups. There you have it. I tend to grow in opaque containers. I've done a little bit of the clear, and that's why I say, from my experience, you'll have fewer circling roots on a clear container. But there you have it. Katie Ann says it works. Joe Black says experience is the best teacher. Always agree with that statement. Nicholas Rice says, Gardener Scott, for a first-time garden, how many different varieties of the same item do you recommend? For example, I like corn, but the seed catalog has a ton of corn types. So, and back to the experience is the best teacher. It comes down to how much you want to learn in a first garden and in your first garden operation, and what your end result is. And so I encourage that you start gardening with the idea to save some of the seeds to then transplant in the next year or future years. Now, to save seed, you need a few things. You need open pollinated plants like an heirloom variety. Hybrids won't work, but this is where it comes down to how many you're going to grow. So if you want to grow corn, and you can grow a ton of corn options out there, if you want to save the seed, well, then a hybrid won't work for you. And so there are some really wonderful, delicious sugar corn, or I should say corn with the sugar flavor in the name. And the names escape me. I'm sure some of you can throw some of them out there. A lot of those corns are hybrids, and you can grow as many of those different types of corn as you choose, because one, they're a hybrid, and if you save the seed, you're not going to be able to grow the same plant, so there's no reason to save the seed. Also, they'll cross-pollinate as the wind blows, but it really doesn't matter because you're not saving the seed. So if you find some catalogs, some descriptions on seed packets that sound like it's a super sweet corn and you want to try it, then get that corn. And if you find some of those that are yellow and white kernels that are mixed and they're beautiful, then get some of those corn and grow two or three varieties, just to see which you like best. And the thing about corn and many other plants, but especially corn, it is wind pollinated. It's not the insects. So you need to plant your corn in a block of plants. And so when I say block, I mean an area that's at least 2 feet wide and 3 feet long, at least a group of plants, so that as the wind blows, it's pollinating. Corn in a single row does not do well. You need a block of corn. Well, since you need a block of corn, and especially if you're planting in a larger bed, then you might as well plant a couple different varieties. Do at least two. If you have an area like a 4-foot by 8-foot block that you're planting corn in, then I'd say grow 2 different varieties that you really like. Now, maybe next year, if you want to start saving some of your seed, now you might only want to grow a single variety, because if you're growing an heirloom variety of corn, you don't want it to be cross-pollinated by another type. And so that's why I say I always look at the seeds or the potential for collecting seeds when I decide how many plants I want to grow. But for hybrids, it doesn't matter. And it's whether I want to grow or not. This last year, I think I grew four, maybe 5 different types of squash plants. But I had no intention of saving seeds because I knew all those different squashes were going to cross-pollinate. if I am more interested in saving the seed, like for instance, this year I'm planning on growing some giant pumpkins. Well, when I grow the giant pumpkins and where I grow the giant pumpkins and how I grow the giant pumpkins is all focused on collecting the seed at the end of the season. So in that one area, that's the only type of pumpkin I'm growing will be those giant pumpkin plants. And so, new gardener, think about that as far as the seeds are concerned. But if the seeds don't matter, then grow what you want to eat or what you think looks good and you want to harvest for the appearance, and that can help decide what plants and how many of them to grow. As far as the experimentation, I always think experimentation is a good idea, like we talked about at the beginning today, and I seldom, unless I'm saving seed, grow a single variety of any plant. I'm always growing multiple plants, new plants, just so I can discover if there's something new out there that I really like to then add to my seed bag next year to continue to grow into the future. So hope that helps. Joseph Lambert, Happy New Year to you, and good to see you signing in from Texas. That's great. Frank Barnwell says, I read on one seed catalog to cut one corn tassel, then shake it vigorously around the other. Sure, that's an option. You know, the idea is that it's not so much the tassel, but the individual hairs will have, this is what I call the tassels, which is the little hairs that are coming out, the little strings that are coming out from the individual ears. Well, that is actually pollinated from above, where you see the flowers. It doesn't really look like flowers, but that's where the pollen is coming from. So the pollen is coming from the top of the plant, and then the pollen is dropping down onto the tassels, the hairs that are on the corn. But you could easily do that. You can cut off the tops of the corn plants and shake them around. The problem is you don't know when the pollen is viable, because pollen does not live forever. It lives for a very short period of time. So if you start cutting off tassels to pollinate other plants, you might not be cutting it off at the right time. The pollen may not have matured yet, and you won't get adequate pollination. So I prefer to just let the plant grow and pollinate itself in a windy setting. And when I say wind, it doesn't need a wind, a strong wind. A breeze is enough, just something to disturb the mature pollen that's at the top of the plant to blow all down onto the ears to then pollinate it from that point forward. Now, when you harvest your ears, if you notice that a lot of those kernels are gone, like there's blank spaces or there's big gaps where there should be kernels, but there aren't, that shows that you have a pollination issue. And so the next time you grow corn, you can get out there. Shaking the plant on a regular basis can also help. So rather than cutting off, if you want to go out there to cut something to help pollinate, instead just shake the plants. And if the pollen is ready to distribute itself throughout the rest of the plants, then it'll fall off. But if it's not mature enough, it'll stick on the plant until it is ready to pollinate. Okay. Laurel's saying, all I can think about now is Christopher Lloyd saying, great Scott. That's good. I like Christopher Lloyd. I was just watching Back to the Future recently, the whole 3-episode series, so that's good. And so New York Unix Guru says, I just read it's not a good idea to save corn seeds. What you might have read is that because so many corn seeds are hybrids, that it's not a good idea to save the corn seed, because when you grow them, you're not going to get the same plant. And I'm trying to think, I don't know if I've ever grown an heirloom corn, because I'm after that sweet flavor, and I really like the white kernels mixed with the yellow kernels. Those are all hybrid corn. And so I don't save my corn seed for that reason, because they're all hybrids. And that might be what you saw. It's not a good idea to save corn seed, because most of the corn seed that's being sold is hybrid plants, and it won't do any good. But there are a few out there that are heirlooms. You just might have to search for them. And those are the ones that you can save. There's Jay Dixon again, reminding to hit the thumbs up. and consider joining. Thank you, Jay. You were just such an awesome person. And Joe Black is saying, shake the pollen on a paper plate, then blow it on the corn. Sure, absolutely, especially for some of those outlying plants or inner plants. I haven't done that yet, but I have seen that done where you can shake the plant and let the pollen fall onto a paper plate or paper bag or some collector, and then go around and blow it yourself. Especially if you've had pollination issues, that's one way to basically hand pollinate corn. Thanks for adding that in there, Joe. That's a nice idea. Peaches and cream. There you go. Thanks, Tammy. That's what I grow. Peaches and cream corn. It's got the white and the yellow kernels. It's delicious. It's sweet. That's so awesome. Thank you. I don't always remember what I'm growing. I just look at the picture, know I want to grow it, put it in the garden, and then harvest it. And then afterwards think, oh, what was the name of that? Which is why it's so important to write it down in a journal to remind yourself what it was. So that's awesome. Thanks so much. And Yanette, thanks. I'm so glad that we can be offering all this great information. It really is. There's a lot of good stuff popping through today. Georgia Gardner Kevin saying, I'm going to pick my single seed challenge later today. That's awesome. So if you don't know about the single seed challenge, this comes from Scott Head and the Black Gumbo channel. And he started this last year. I participated until my tomato plant died. His tomato plant died. And I actually reached out to Scott. I'm hoping that he might be able to join us on this live stream in one of the upcoming weeks to talk about the single seed challenge. The idea being that with all the gardening that you're doing, whether you're starting seeds from indoors or just sowing all your seeds directly outdoors, or even if you're not doing seeds, just with your plants that you're putting in your garden, is pick one. And then learn about that plant. Focus on that plant. See how that plant is growing in your garden. And I think it's a great idea to really help all of us learn more things about the plant we chose or the seed we chose. And so I was growing black Krim tomato last year, started it from seed. You might have seen the video where I showed last year starting from seed, and I pointed out which of the plants were the black Krim I was using in the single seed challenge, and then put it in the garden. And so grew a lot of tomato plants, started a lot of plants from seeds, but it really was interesting to think about it. And every time I watered that plant, I really paid a little bit extra attention to it because I was focused on that plant as part of the single seed challenge. Now, I had that crazy hailstorm and early freeze, and none of my tomato plants made it to harvest last year. It was a crazy year. But even then, I was able to follow that plant when I put it back into my compost pile. And so it really was interesting to, in essence, drive a garden year by a focus on a plant. Doesn't mean that the rest of the plants don't matter. It just means that if you're picking a tomato, for instance, because you're thinking about tomato, now when you see videos or articles about tomatoes, you're more likely to listen to that video or read that article because you have an extra interest in it. And so great idea. Hopefully we'll see Scott in the near future and he can talk more about the idea behind the single seed challenge and also challenge all of you to do the same thing this year. So Let's Get Growing is asking, do you have tips on growing coffee trees? The biggest tip I have is to learn about the coffee tree and your own climate and soil and region. I know a number of people that have grown coffee trees in my area here in Colorado, and almost all of them are taking or have taken the tree out because it was sold as a fast-growing tree, was going to do well, but once it got in the landscape, it didn't do well. They didn't like how it grew, and they've taken the coffee tree out. So it can be a great tree for a lot of people, but it's not the best tree for every landscape. And so depending on where you are and what your intent is for putting in a coffee tree, I would suggest checking with your extension service, talk to someone at the nursery, see if you find someone that's also grown a coffee tree in your area for the best suggestions on how to grow it, because it can be good, but it's not always the best choice for everybody. And Lena's saying have a coffee tree indoors. There you go. If you keep it pruned and keep it growing in a pot, indoors is a nice option. And Trudy's Fun is saying, I can't decide on a single seed. I know that was the issue I had last year, was thinking, what am I going to choose? Now, black Krim is my favorite tomato to eat. So I thought, let's track how a black Krim tomato grows from seed to harvest. And I didn't make it to harvest, but there's one place to start, is maybe choosing one of your favorite foods that you're growing this year and track that way. Or just the complete opposite. Choose something that you've never grown before and track it from the seed to the harvest and decide, is it going to be something you continue to grow in future years? So there's something to consider. So let's talk for just a couple minutes here about the background behind me. This comes from Joy Brown today. She sent it to me a few months ago now. And so typical, so many of us have the pests in our garden. We often talk about the pests as insects, but pests could easily be animals. And so the deer walking through Joy's backyard, took a picture, sent it to me. I thought I'd share that with you today. I don't have deer in my new garden. I did have a pretty big deer problem at my last garden, and I did a video about that, about the deer in the landscape. When we moved into that house, our backyard, which had no fence, it was all open area, was a regular bedding site for about 9 or 10 deer. And so as I began developing my garden, had to put up a fence, had to start dealing with some deer deterrence, and it became pretty effective. I ended up being able to grow a pretty good garden with few deer problem. But it highlights, regardless of what the animal is, whether it's rabbits or squirrels or raccoons or deer, if you have that problem, this is yet another thing that you've got to learn, because it's not easy to reach the point of harvest when you have animal pests that could come in and destroy your garden. I like to live and let live. I'll deter the animals as much as possible, and especially with deer, the best way you can deter them is with a barrier of some type, and different types of fencing can help. There are other things you can do, but it all comes down to you, your garden, your pest, and you learning what's the best way to control it. And that's why I wanted to pop this up, is just to generate a little bit of discussion to see if any of the rest of you see what kind of pests you have, how you've dealt with them successfully, and maybe we can share some information back and forth. For me, it was barriers. It was putting up wire around plants. It was putting up fences. And then it was planting some sacrificial plants that I knew the deer would eat, and hopefully leave alone some of the plants that were in a different area. And that actually worked pretty effectively. Christian G, thank you to Garden Support. It's good to have you on board as a Gardener Scott community member. Thanks. Trudy's Fun says, we have cane toads and bush turkeys. They always wreak havoc in my garden. And there you have it. Just goes to show, Australia has different animals than we have here in the States. And it doesn't matter what the pest is, they can wreak havoc on the garden. Even for you, I imagine the toads and the turkeys, gets to barriers. If you really want to protect your plant, you got to put up a barrier. And for most of the animal pests we have, that's going to work. Doesn't always work with squirrels, doesn't always work with raccoons, it doesn't work with gophers. If they can tunnel underneath it or climb over it, they often will, which is it again. And I know some of you have asked these questions in my videos. I don't often mention it, but in my videos where I show building beds and filling beds, if you look closely, you'll see wire at the bottom of my beds. So all of my beds have wire at the bottom to help keep out the gophers. and to also deter any rabbits that might attempt to dig under my bed. So even though I don't mention it often, I have that problem, and that's the way that I've resolved to try to deal with them. I'll have a video coming out here in a few months about my new metal beds, and I'm actually burying those metal beds in the ground to a depth of about 8 inches. Again, to deter the gophers and the rabbits from attempting to dig underneath, and I'm still putting the wire at the bottom of the beds. Barriers work, and often you've got to do it. Craig Hughes is saying, my single seed challenge is the Greyhound cabbage. Good for you. I haven't grown the Greyhound cabbage, so I can't speak to that, but good. Glad you chose one. Okay, Strong Style Organics says, don't get me started on the dogs. That's good. You know, I am planning on getting a new dog here in the months ahead, and it's already in my mind of doing a video about training dogs in the garden. I've had a number of dogs over the years, and you can train them to stay out of the beds most of the time until they see a squirrel on the other side of the yard and they just do straight path. And if your garden beds are in the way, they'll run right through them. Barriers, again, help deter even dogs within a garden setting. So yeah, I won't get you started on the dogs, but I've had a lot of good experiences with the dogs in my garden that far outweigh the bad experience that I've had. Tamara saying, Gardner Scott, wanting scion wood for my first year apple tree, but it still has green leaves all over it and hasn't gone dormant. Why hasn't it gone dormant in zone 5 or 9B? It could be because it hasn't gotten cold yet, cold enough for you. And so 9B is 30 degrees average lowest winter temperature, if I am counting right. And that could be the issue, that it just hasn't or maybe won't go dormant because you're just not going to be cold enough in the winter. You can still take cuttings and still try to grow some of those scions, or I should say, if you're doing it for rooting, you can still take those cuttings to root. If you're using them as fruiting scions, you can still do it while they're green and still have success. So I don't have videos on that yet. I don't have a lot of experience with that. Most of the time we do it when it's dormant, but you can do it when it's growing. For instance, tomato plants. You can buy grafted tomato plants, and they're grafted while they're still growing. And there's a lot of trees that can be grafted while they're still growing. In 9B, I probably wouldn't hold my breath and expect some of those plants to go dormant if they haven't already. But look at your lowest temperatures in the forecast and see what you expect. But you're right at that point close to freezing conditions. And I think a lot of the trees you're growing just aren't going to have that cold period where they go dormant. Thanos, good to see you again. Thank you so much for that contribution, that super chat. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm so glad to have you here on Mondays, and so glad that you're contributing and participating. Thanks. I really do appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Denise is saying the single seed challenge will be the Wisconsin 55 tomato. I haven't grown that one either, so that's good for you. That's awesome. Growing, you know, I've grown a lot of black creme, and it was an easy decision last year, but that's a really good, both of you so far. I think I will choose one of the more unique varieties for myself this year as well. I haven't decided either. And Muffy 1981 says, I put chicken wire on the bottom of my beds too. It works, absolutely. There's a lot of people I know will use hardware cloth. Hardware cloth is more durable. You can get it in 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch squares. The chicken wire is not, or poultry netting is not as durable, but I find it to be just as effective at a fraction of the cost. So that's what I use as well. And thanks for adding to the conversation. Okay, Doris Miller saying, hello, Gardner Scott, coming on late. We'll be watching the beginning later. Good, Doris. Good to have you here and glad that you'll be watching. There's always so much information that's all packed into this. I also want to talk about plant choice today. And since we're talking about the single seed challenge, it fits right in. And that's one reason why I wanted to bring it up. We've kind of touched a little bit on it, talking about the corn and the single seed challenge. But as you are deciding on what to grow, if you haven't got your seed yet, or you, like me, are always buying seed, or you're looking to the plants, really do take a little bit extra time and think about why you're growing those plants. Now, I grow just to grow, and I grow to try new things. And, honestly, the harvest is a small part of why I'm growing. I'm growing for the experience of building a garden, getting out in it, and growing. And so for me, the harvest is secondary. So as I choose my seeds and as I start planning out my garden, I think more about what plants I want to grow and what experiences I want to have in my garden. And that's how I choose most of the seeds and the plants I want to grow. If your primary purpose is harvest and getting that food for you and your family, well, then that should be something that you look at. And this is why the seed selection and the plant selection can be very important, because there's a lot of plants out there that all of us grow, but they're not necessarily the best plants for food production. It's just a plant that people grow because we like to grow it. There's a lot of squashes, for instance, that will give you a lot of fruit, and that's great. But if you do a little bit more research and the purpose of your squash growing is for food, well, then choose a variety that is more productive, that can give more fruit in a given space. And that holds true for corn. There's a lot of wonderful corn out there, but it's only going to give you 1 ear per plant. Most corns will give you 2 ears per plant, but you can look and find corn plants that give you 3 ears per plant. And that's what I'm talking about, is figure out your intent, your purpose, your reason for gardening with those plants, and then choose the seeds. It takes a little bit of extra work to find where you can buy a seed that gives you more of what you're looking for. But by taking that extra little bit of time, that extra little bit of effort, you can hope to have more success because that's your primary goal. I like to have fun. I like to do things. In fact, I want to point out a couple weeks ago, I was talking about the gift of giving in gardening and to give the gift of gardening. Well, I want to let you know that my granddaughters spent some time thinking about this. And so not only have I given my granddaughters the gift of gardening, but they're reciprocating. And so for my birthday, I got a sugar magnolia pea. They picked out themselves. It's a purple pea. I've never grown a purple snap pea. And so I really like this company. I'll be actually doing more videos where I talk about, this is a Colorado company, Botanical Interests. I really like them, but they have the purple snap pea that I got from my granddaughters. And I'm also preparing a video, which is why this works so well. I got a honey source wildflower mix. I've got a whole part of my garden that I'm expanding for pollinators, for bees. And so my granddaughters decided to get me some seeds for my garden this year. How wonderful is that? And so I'll definitely be growing these seeds. And particularly with the purple pea, I might not necessarily have chosen a purple pea. I've grown some purple green beans and purple carrots just to see what they look like at harvest. I would have probably gotten to the purple pea eventually, but now I have them. And so I think that's spectacular. But I wanted to tie that into this discussion because purple peas might be one of those things to try. I'll let you know how they taste. I'll let you know how they do at the end of the season. But I think it's awesome that my granddaughter stepped forward and got me some seeds that I might not necessarily have considered. And my daughter and my granddaughters also got me a bug house to add to my bee hotel. And so all of these are wonderful things. I'm so thankful for my family and them helping me in my gardening journey with these few things. But these are the kind of thoughts I just wanted to impart on you today as you're choosing your seeds. Don't be afraid to get a little crazy and buy some purple pea pods to grow in your garden. It's one of those things at the end of the season, even if they don't taste as good as other peas might, well, at least you can say you grew some purple peas. I definitely will. So think about why you're growing and what you want to do in your garden in your seed selection, and you might get away from some of the humdrum stuff that all of us are doing, like already being pointed out in the single seed challenge, some really unique stuff. And I think that is awesome. I think that's fantacular. OMFUG says peas are a tough grow in my cool, rainy climate. We get terrible powdery mildew. I'm sorry to hear that. That's one of those things. I grow peas in raised beds, and raised beds can help a little bit in the cool, rainy environments because they're typically more or better draining than open ground. But consider putting some cover over your beds. Grow with something over the top of hoops. That'll help keep some of the moisture out and will also help keep the powdery mildew from blowing in. So I did that at the end of this last season. I mentioned it in a couple of videos, but my cool season plants did way better at the end of the season growing than at the beginning of the season growing because I kept the bed covered with row cover during the entire time. And I had I had no issues with powdery mildew. I had very few issues with pests, and the plants did wonderfully. So a little bit of cover might be one of those tips to help you have a little bit more success with your peas. Let me know if that works. Okay, Strong Style Organic says, oh yeah, thanks for your seed catalog videos. Found so many great companies I had overlooked in the past. So next week, and I'll go ahead and put this bug in your ear, so to speak. So it was suggested that I actually let you know all the different catalogs that I get. So I'm going to do that next year. I just saw that suggestion this morning. I'll make a list. I have dozens of them. I just did the video that came out this weekend where I gave you what I think are some of the best gardening catalogs for new gardeners, the ones that have a lot of extra information in them. But there are many, many catalogs that I get and order from just because I'm looking for some unique seeds that I can only find in some unique catalog. So next week, I'll be highlighting some of the different catalogs that I get and go through the list, let you know all the different ones. And I'm guessing that they're probably similar to what you get, but every week, every time I do a video like that, someone suggests a video or suggests a catalog that I've never heard of before. And I'll often order that catalog and see how it fits with what I want to order and what I want to learn. So catalogs are great. And I'm glad you enjoyed the video. That's great. Okay. Kyra Witt saying, I'm growing lettuce this winter and it's doing well with just a row cover and hoop so far in 6B. That's great. We haven't had terribly cold weather so far here in my 5B. And so I'm guessing you've had similar conditions. And so in relatively mild winters, yeah, row cover over hoops, you can continue growing well into the winter. So I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that the lettuce is still doing well. That's awesome. Yeah, New York Unix Guru is saying I'm a territorial seed guy. I do like territorial seed. I've been buying from them and growing territorial seeds for a long time. So I recommend the company, I recommend the seeds, and I recommend the catalog. I am a territorial seed guy. That's true. Okay, Laura says my seed challenges are growing disease-resistant tomatoes. Good for you. And I did talk about that in that catalog video where you can look for the disease resistance, especially in a catalog. You should see it on a plant tag as well. And so if you have particular diseases, and I know we talked about this on an earlier live stream as well, you can find varieties that are resistant to that disease. And that may be a way to have success with a particular type of plant in your environment that might not otherwise do well. Julie Nelson, thank you for that contribution. Hi all from beautiful Idaho. Low 40s all week, heat wave. Moved from 9B to 6B, and now I have to learn how to grow all over again. Thanks. Yeah, we're having a heat wave too. We're about 10 degrees above normal all week this week. And that you raise an interesting point. And I've mentioned this a few times in the past. So when I became a master gardener and went through the Colorado State University Master Gardener program, I was here in Colorado, hadn't picked up a lot of gardening knowledge. So that was really the best way for me to really learn how to grow. It was focused on Colorado growing, and that's how I really learned to put plants in the ground, grow, and then expanded my knowledge from there. At the Galileo School Garden, I had many volunteers helping out. It was a really big scale operation. Well, I had a master gardener from California, and I had a master gardener from Kansas that had moved to Colorado and were helping me in the garden. And one reason they were helping me at the Galileo Garden was because even though they were master gardeners in their respective states, it was a completely different growing environment here in Colorado. And so they volunteered to work with me because they wanted to learn how to grow in Colorado. So I definitely understand the situation you're in. When you move from an environment, especially from 9 to 6, that's a 30-degree difference in winter, and the plants are completely different as to what will grow well and what won't. And so I wish you the best on your gardening journey as you continue to learn. It will be a challenge, but I have no doubt that you'll have success. You're here, you're sharing information with all of us and vice versa, and that's a good place to start. So that's awesome. Teddy Bear DIY, greetings to all. Love the deer in the background. Thanks. And again, if you missed it, that's from Joy Brown. That's Joy Brown's landscape, sharing the deer in the background. Okay, let's see what else we have. Nachi G's asking, is it safe to use copper fungicide in a pine tree this time of year in Utah Zone 7B? So I learned something new recently about the copper fungicides. And so generally speaking, well, first off, it depends. It depends on what kind of fungal problem you have and whether you even need a fungicide. It also depends on what weather you're expecting, because the fungi will also go dormant on cold temperatures. And so if you apply it when it's dormant or living within the plant, then a fungicide may have no effect whatsoever, and then it snows and it rains and the fungicide all washes off. So I would look a little bit deeper into what you're trying to deal with, and then find out if the fungicide is suitable for that. And there should be application directions to tell you best time of year and how to apply it. But what I learned recently, as I've been watching a lot more and learning a lot more about soil and the role that fungi play within soil and within our plants. If you remember a while back, I was talking about soil and the use of chemical fertilizers in soil, and how even though a fertilizer will give nutrients to a plant, it can mess up the soil biosphere, that rhizosphere that's right next to the roots with the plants and the soil. If you put chemicals in the soil, it can disrupt the bacteria and the fungi, and even though there are nutrients in the fertilizer, the soil is disrupted, and as soon as those nutrients are gone, the plants will suffer because it's been disrupted. Well, the same holds true on the outside of plants and inside of plants as far as fungi is concerned. There's a lot of bacteria and a lot of fungi beneficial to plants that are really helping the plant grow and thrive. And by applying a fungicide to deal with a fungus that might be harming the plant, at the same time you're damaging the good fungi that might be working to fight the bad stuff and might be working to make your plant stronger. So I don't use fungicides, and now I'm even more hesitant to use fungicides because it's the same basic idea. If you have an insect pest and you just spray your plants with a pesticide to kill that pest, well, you're also going to be killing a lot of the beneficial insects. It works the same way with the fungicide. If you apply a copper-based fungicide, you're not only killing the bad fungus, you're also killing the good fungus. And unless you know exactly what fungi are involved, you really have to be careful. So I do suggest learning a little bit more about what the problem is, and even if it needs a fungicide application. I know I've said in the past that you can apply copper-based fungicides if you have problems, but the more I learn, the more I'm veering away from that, because I didn't know much about all the good fungi out there. And the more I learn about them, the more I want to encourage them, just like the more I want to encourage all the other beneficials in my garden. So there you have it. That might not have been what you were expecting. Okay. And Lily at Cordosa is also saying, love the background. So I hope you're on today, Joy. I haven't seen you comment, or I hope you watch this on replay, but there you have it. You got a lot of people saying that they like the deer in your landscape. That's great. Okay. Yeah. A to Z Gardener saying, I'll be trying flowers. Looks like sunflowers this year in sunny Arizona. Good match. I'm going to be growing a lot more sunflowers in sunny Colorado this year as well. So it's one of those things that match the flowers with your landscape and your weather, and sunflowers will do well in so many areas. I love sunflowers. Gets back to that idea of why we grow plants. I grow my sunflowers not only because they look great, but for the birds. When it comes to harvest time, I give all the sunflower seeds to the birds. All the sunflowers I had this year, I cut those plants down. I put them all in the back of my garden, open, and just let the birds feast. And so I'm choosing to grow sunflowers again this year because of the beauty, but also because I want to encourage birds to the garden. So I'll be giving them all that sunflower seed. Laura Bahena, welcome to the Garden Support membership on the channel. That's awesome. Thanks so much. Teddy Bear DIY. I reckon that also holds true for herbicides like Roundup too. I have a huge patch where weeds grow, but no grass will take hold for the last 2.5 years. Roundup is supposed to go, or how should I say this? It's ineffective once it hits the soil. And so it's supposed to be plant specific, and then once it hits the soil, it's inert and isn't supposed to affect plants anymore. But yes, the same concept holds. Even though Roundup itself, the glyphosate, isn't harming future plants as far as the poison being inert, it's still disrupting all the soil environment. Even if it is inert in the soil, I have to think that it is disrupting the soil biome, and that may be a more important consideration why some of the plants like grass isn't growing. There could be other factors as well, but you have to think about that with everything we're applying in our garden. Even organic fertilizers and organic amendments, you do have to start thinking about what the ultimate influence is going to be as far as the soil and the insects and the animals and the plants. It all starts playing together, which is why I'm trying to go as natural as possible to reach that balance point. So anyway, it's something to think about. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about New Year's resolutions. I'm not a big resolutions guy. I tend to think that resolutions are one of those things that you say you're going to do and then you don't do, and then you feel bad about not doing it. And that's been shown in so many studies of people who make a New Year's resolution. Now, often the reason it's not successful is because they choose something too big. I'm going to lose 150 pounds, and then they only lose 75 pounds and they feel bad, as opposed to thinking about the progress they made. It's a lot of other things. I'm going to quit smoking. Well, it's hard to stop a habit by making a big overall general statement like that. And it holds true for gardening as well. And I think there's a lot of gardeners that start off with the new year with big plans, big ideas, a resolution for what's going to be different in the garden this year. And then if you don't achieve it, well, it's so easy to look at it as a failure. And that's what I want to talk about. Is just try to avoid the whole concept of making a gardening resolution for the rest of the year. Instead, you can still use that basic idea. And I think the beginning of the year is a wonderful time to look at your garden, to look at your gardening, and to decide what you want to try that's new, what you want to do differently. And don't call it a resolution, just call it part of your gardening journey. Now, if you're keeping a garden journal, sure, by all means, on January 1st or the first week of the year or January 4th, do it today. You can write down some of these things you want to accomplish in your garden this year. And use that more as a goal. Don't think of it as, if I don't accomplish this, I'm a failure. Look at it as, I want to accomplish this. And then take the most important steps, which are, how do I get there? What do I need to modify about my habits and behaviors to accomplish that? And then once I get there, what am I going to do with it? And so I'll go ahead and share some of the ideas that I'm planning to do with my garden this year. I'm planning on growing a pollinator garden, which is why, a wildflower mix like this is so awesome. I'm going to be growing a lot of plants from seed, back to that question from Frank, and put those plants out. So I'm going to be sowing seed, and I'm going to be putting plants in that space of my garden as a pollinator garden. And that's it. That's in essence what you could call a resolution. It should be relatively easy to accomplish, just sowing some seeds, starting some plants, and then transplanting. I'm not building into that goal the specifics of, I'm going to put these plants in and attract hummingbirds. I'm not going to put these plants in and attract monarch butterflies. That's great, and that's an awesome result if you can accomplish that. But there's so many steps that need to take place. So this year, I just want to start that garden. I just want to get some flowers in the ground. And that's a goal. Call it a resolution, but instead it's just, what am I going to do in my garden this year? So I'm growing pollinator plants. Now, after those plants are established and after those garden beds are in place, now I can take it to the next level and say, okay, this is what's working. This is what needs to be added. This is what needs to be removed. Now, if hummingbirds and butterflies are a part of that, and they are a part of that for me, you can build them into the process. And so my ultimate goal is to create this pollinator garden. Well, I want to attract some butterflies. So as I choose the flowers that are going in that pollinator garden, now I'll choose some of the flowers to attract butterflies, the types of butterflies I know that are in my area. I've got milkweed that's growing throughout my landscape now, hoping to attract monarch butterflies, even though I read recently that the monarch population is plummeting. They're there. If the monarchs come, great. If they don't, that's sad. But at least I put those plants in as part of my goal to create this space to benefit pollinators. Because there's a lot of other insects that will benefit from those milkweed plants aside from the monarchs. And that's why I say be careful about focusing too much on attracting one particular animal or insect, because there's a lot of others that can benefit. Hummingbirds are the same way. I'm going to be growing some tubular flowers this year, hoping that butterflies will come. But if the hummingbirds, hoping that I can get hummingbirds to come. But if the hummingbirds don't come, that's okay. I've still started the garden. I'm still affecting other animals and insects that are out there. Eventually, the hummingbirds should show up. I heard a hummingbird fly over this last summer. There were no flowers really to come and enjoy. It did rest on my arch for a brief period and took some nectar from the hairy vetch I had growing in the bed. And that's great motivation to continue growing some of these other plants to attract hummingbirds. So I will try to attract them. But overall, the goal is just to grow this garden bed. And that's kind of how I would like you to think about it, is start your beginning year of the year looking at your garden with some of these thoughts that can be easily achieved. Grow a bed of lettuce in the winter underneath hoops. Grow more sunflowers. Grow corn for the first time. It's that simple. That's all a New Year's gardening resolution needs to be. Just something nice and simple and easily attainable. And then you write it down in your journal. At the end of the season, you follow up and say, it worked, it didn't work, whatever it happened to be. But those are the kind of things that can really keep you involved in gardening, is setting those goals so they can be attained. When you set those lofty goals for your garden and then it doesn't happen, it's so sad. I see so many gardeners, and I've advised some in the Master Gardener program and when I was at the school that asked me to come take a look at their garden, and they were just discouraged. And some of them even quit. And it was because they just tried too big. And their goal just wasn't attainable, especially in a challenging environment like Colorado. So set a goal that is attainable, call that your gardening resolution, and then seek to make that happen and enjoy the whole process through the seed selection, through the planting, but especially through the observation. Because if you're trying to attract butterflies or hummingbirds or beneficial insects, it really gives you that good warm feeling when you actually see them arrive in your garden. So be involved with the whole process and seek that balance between the animals and the bacteria and the fungi and everything else. And that's really, at least for me, the best way to enjoy the whole experience. I set some lofty goals this last year. I intended to have many more beds constructed and growing than I did. And I have to admit that at the end of the season, even during the middle of the season, when I saw that it wasn't going to happen, it was stressful. There was some anxiety. And gardening shouldn't do that. It shouldn't evoke stress and anxiety. And I found myself having to sit and relax and just say, oh, well, the beds didn't get built this year, maybe next year. And I'm just trying to get you to be as stress-free as you can in your garden, because it's so much easier to enjoy it when you don't have that stress. So I just wanted to share some ideas. I'd be glad to hear about your resolutions, what your goals are for the year, what you're planning on doing, because I think we can all get new ideas from others that we might not have thought of. And I do that all the time based on comments to my videos. Someone will tell me what they're doing, and it'll be like, yeah, I need to do that too. So sharing ideas can be great. Let's see what else is popping up here. So Mrs. Marvel saying, and this ties in here too, anyone know of a good ground cherry video? I do not have one. I've been trying to grow ground cherries for 3 years now and still have not had success with it. When I do have success, I'm planning to do a video about it, but it isn't working in my garden. I'm going to try a few new things this year. I'm going to start the plants earlier indoors. I think that was a problem this last year. But there you go. You know, if I had set grand cherries as my major goal, I would have been disappointed for each of the last seasons. Now, instead, it's something I want to continue doing, and I'm just going to do it differently. But I haven't set it as a great goal because I'm expecting some of the failure to result, which is terrible, but that just happens. So let's see. We got lots of people on, lots of good information playing back and forth, lots of new members to the channel, and it's so good to see you all here. Next Monday, we're going to be doing the same thing. I do hope that I'll see you here on Mondays. For those of you that are watching in replay or maybe missed it and are new to it, these live streams take place at 9 o'clock Mountain Time. That's 11 o'clock On the East Coast, it's 8 o'clock a.m. On the West Coast, I can't speak to what time it is in Australia and lots of other places in the world, but it is at the same time every week. So if you've discovered us for the first time or you're just joining in, come back tomorrow at the same time and we'll be here. And always see a lot of the same people, a lot of good information passing back and forth. And it's always an enjoyable experience that I know a lot of us look forward to. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I know we've had a lot to talk about today, a lot of good information, and I thank all of you for being here. And I thank all of you who have been passing back great information and sharing what you're doing in the garden as well. So thank you. I look forward to seeing you next Monday. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.